Welcome to From the Heart of the City, a podcast. I'm Kevin George. I'm the dean here at St. Paul's Cathedral, where we host this podcast. This is a place where we explore the intersection of faith and hospitality, justice, community. And we do all that through conversations with local neighborhood folks, our church community, and authors and theologians so that we can challenge ourselves to see the world in a better way. If you've spent any time watching the news lately, it's easy to feel overwhelmed. So much news, so much to be consumed with. We see that wildfires, again this year already, consuming entire communities, floods washing away homes, droughts leaving families without homes and wondering where their next meal will come from. Storms that once seemed extraordinary are now becoming increasingly more ordinary. But climate change isn't only about weather, and we know that. It's about people. It's about family, forced to leave home because of rising sea levels. It's about newcomers who arrive in Canada after losing everything back in their home communities. And it's about the senior who can't afford to cool their apartment during a heat wave. Indigenous communities having to protect lands and fight back against development that they have not approved of. And it's about women and girls who so often bear the greatest burdens when disaster strikes. It's about justice. But for Christians, it's also about theology. What do we believe about creation? What do we imagine when we speak about God? How is our understanding of dominion sometimes become more about domination? Have we forgotten that we're creatures before we're consumers? These are the sorts of questions that are teased apart in a book called Earthbound. My guest today invites us to think differently, not only about climate change, but how we think about God and how our relationship with God and the climate interacts with how we live out our faith. She suggests that the way we imagine God shapes the way we imagine ourselves, our neighbors, and the whole created order. And she introduces us to many new beautiful concepts like Jiong, a love that binds us together, and Han, the deep suffering left behind by injustice. And together, they remind us that we are profoundly interconnected and that faith calls us not simply to believe differently, but to live differently. We're being called to remember that the earth is our common home and that every creature bears the breath of God, and that our calling is not domination, but it is love. So I'm delighted to welcome theologian, author, teacher, preacher, Grace Ji-Sun Kim, to From the Heart of the City as we discuss her remarkable new book, Earthbound, God at the Intersection of Climate and Justice. Grace, come on in. All right. Welcome, Grace. It's great to have you. I should say welcome home because London is home for you, right, Grace? In some ways, London is home.
Yes, London is my home, so it's great to be back on your podcast. So thank you so much for inviting me.
Oh, it's so wonderful that you could be here. I've been trying to keep up with your travels online. It's next to impossible. You're everywhere. And I promise you, you'll be here in London again soon because I want you back here in London and preaching at St.
Um,
Paul's Cathedral.
yeah, anytime I'll be there in a heartbeat. So
All
yeah,
right.
invite me back. Yeah.
And you just ran a retreat here, yeah?
In at Creve Hills. So I don't know how far that is. I think it's
Not
pretty
far.
close.
Yeah, it's close
Yeah.
to us.
And then I'll be doing another one on Earthbound, the book that we're going to talk about today. So it'll be great if some Londoners can come to
Yep.
Creve Hills at the end of August
Right.
for the Earthbound retreat.
Yep. And I'll put information about that on you'll find it in the comments on this podcast. So please check it out. There will be a link there where you can register and go. That sounds like a great time. Okay. I
Yeah.
have so many questions about Earthbound because it's such a good book. Thank you for writing this.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for reading it and for having me on your podcast. I love your
Um,
new podcast logo and everything. It's really
yeah, well,
exciting.
it's the heart of the city, you know, and
Yeah.
I'd be remiss if I didn't say hello to you from my buddy Rob Henderson from the
Uh-huh.
Vickers Crossing days. Those of
Yeah.
you who are new to the podcast, myself and my colleague Rob Henderson hosted the Vickers Crossing for about 6 or 7 years, and
Uh-huh.
Grace guessed it twice, and she came to the city. We had her in here doing a book event, so I'm just happy to have you on this new adventure. So
Well, thank you so much. And please say hi to your friend too.
I will do. Okay, Grace, in Earthbound. You argue that our dependence on fossil fuels isn't just an environmental issue. It's spiritual, it's moral, and it's economic. You write that we become energy vampires, which I really was consumed by that idea. And in that, we consume far more than our share, while the cost of what we're consuming is borne by the poor and by future generations, and importantly, by the earth itself. How do you help Christians move beyond seeing climate change simply as a political issue and instead recognize it as a matter of discipleship, of justice, and of love for neighbor? And what are some of the concrete ways, if you think about the local church community, that we can begin living differently without becoming overwhelmed by the scale of the crisis? Because it's big.
Yeah, yeah. The climate crisis is global and it's huge. It's bigger than what normal people may imagine it to be.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm glad you're beginning with this question because this is the most common question that people in the pews are asking. So
Mm-hmm.
this past May, I worked with Green Faith to
Mm-hmm.
hold an event on climate justice in conjunction with the Korea Seoul YWCA. And that was a question. Why are we people of faith even at this conference? Why should we be concerned about climate justice? Because
Mm-hmm.
people just see it as a political or a scientific issue. It is all political and scientific. I think why people raise this in the pews is we think of spirituality as me and God.
Mm-hmm.
So, we come to church, we worship, we pray. In the US, it's mostly individual prayer.
Mm-hmm.
We read scripture, and that is all good. That is all necessary for our faith journey, our spiritual growth, etc.
Mm-hmm.
What many people misunderstand or forget is that spirituality is all of that, plus what we do in the everyday.
Amen.
I'm actually working on a new kind of devotional called Everyday Spirituality. Well,
Mm.
that's what I'm calling it.
Yeah.
Someone else may call it differently once it's
Yeah.
accepted.
Yeah.
But it is what we do every day. That is part of our spirituality.
Mm-hmm.
So, climate justice is our everyday actions. So, carbon emissions, how we eat, how we
Mm-hmm.
dress, how we move around in this world, that is all part of this spirituality. And so, people in the pews kind of make this disconnect between that and what we do in the pews. But I'm trying to say everything that you do is about our faith journey, is about spirituality. And so climate justice, this climate change that is happening, is part of our spiritual kind of challenge. Are we going to continue this road of destruction? Or
Mm-hmm.
are we going to change our ways, our views, and our everyday habits to curb what is happening in this world and in our country and in North
Mm-hmm.
America and around the globe?
Mm-hmm. And a part of what shapes that, I think, is the images we use for God. And you write about this, right? So you say that the images we use are never merely descriptive; they shape the way we live. And you argue that when our theology becomes centered on domination, which a lot of Christian theology has been about, and about the dominion that we steward, it can reinforce patterns of domination, not just over people, although we've seen lots of that, and we've talked about that before when we talked about when God became white, etc., but also over creation, right? It's domination of the created order. Help us understand that connection. How does the way we imagine God affect the way we inhabit the world? And share a little bit of your theological vision for how you believe the church needs to react today if we're going to become agents of healing rather than exploitation.
Yeah, so when you had me on before for God, when God became white,
Yeah.
that was, I've been writing books for the past 20 years. I've been
Hmm.
teaching and preaching and all that. But it was really when I was writing When God Became White that our image of who God is really
Hmm.
impacts our everyday behavior. So
Right.
in that book, I really wrestled with the question of racism. And,
Hmm.
I really appreciated you and your friend when I was there in London, speaking
Hmm.
at Western and did the book talk at one of your churches, that you
Hmm.
took me back to my childhood home and the school and the community that I grew up in. And
Hmm.
so that was like, 45, 50 years ago where our family immigrated and we experienced a lot of racism. So
Hmm.
50 years later, where we are living in a globalized world and people now know where Korea is, the
Right.
Olympics was held there, so many activities, K-pop, K-drama, Parasite
Hmm.
movie winning. So all of these are happening. So why is there still so much racism? And
Hmm.
that's when I kind of realize our image of who God is really impacts our behavior.
Hmm.
So for the last 2,000 years, no one has seen like the Christian God that we're worshiping and believing in, but
Hmm.
most everyone will say that God is an old white man. And
Hmm.
that's due to our theology being very Eurocentric, male-centered, and our paintings and our ceilings, our stained glass
Yep.
windows, everything depicting an old white man, which really reinforce the sexism and the racism. And as you mentioned, the other dimension of Christianity that wasn't so good is this notion of domination. So that was biblically kind of reinforced in the pews, and that's what allowed the Crusades to happen,
Hmm.
colonialism to happen, and just, dominion over or this domination over other people that allowed enslavement and indenturing of other groups of people. So how we interpret scripture and how we imagine who God is really affects our behavior, or it really reinforces our behavior of domination, of colonialism, of racism, and of patriarchy. So in Earthbound, I'm really focusing on this climate change that is happening. And so Christians have misinterpreted the Genesis passage of, dominating over the earth or
Hmm.
dominating over people. They just go hand in hand. Because as Christians, when we're dominating over people, we are also in turn dominating over the earth. And
Hmm.
so I really ask the readers how we imagine who God is will affect it.
Hmm.
So much of Christian history and theology, we've used nouns to talk about who God is.
Hmm.
And much of these nouns and the metaphors have been masculine, have been are of domination. For
Yep.
example, the understanding of God as king,
Hmm.
Lord, um,
Yep.
master,
Master.
and
Yeah.
yeah, and father have
Yeah.
reinforced this understanding of, okay, if God is this, then we can be the same, because we do talk about, we are created in the image of
Image.
God. And so if we only, God is this big,
Hmm.
and if we're only focused on this tiny bit of who God is, using these dominant metaphors or masculine metaphors, or using white images, we're only getting a tiny bit, because the Bible is filled with other images and metaphors. And
Hmm.
that's why it's so important to listen to women theologians,
Hmm.
feminist theologians who are retrieving some of these images to help us to get a more holistic image of
Hmm.
who God is. Then that will help us. And well, that ultimately impacts how we think and how we behave and how we speak and how we act. So the
Hmm.
book is really challenging our old ways of thinking about God and bringing in new ways of speaking about God, which will help us in this climate change that
Hmm.
we are facing.
Interesting in that conversation, when you're talking about we use nouns, we have nouns that we use for God. Is you extend that conversation by talking about speaking of God as a verb.
Yes.
which is really interesting to me. I don't know if you can say a word
Yeah.
about that.
So yeah. So people read the book because then you'll get a deeper understanding why I am putting forth. And originally the book I called it because publishers always
Yeah,
change
they have
it.
their own ideas.
Yeah. So I actually called it God is a Verb, and they didn't like
Oh,
it.
oh no,
Uh, yeah. So that
no, I
was the
love that.
original.
God is a verb. I would have loved that.
Yeah. So that was my original title, God is a
It's
Verb, and they didn't like it. But that is the whole heart of the book.
it
Be-
absolutely. It jumped right out at me. It's like God is a verb. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, this is amazing.
Yeah. And then when God became white, I called it whiteness, but I actually like when God became white better
Right.
than whiteness.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, this one, it was when God is a verb, because that is the whole point of why Christians, that is part of our spirituality, why we need to really get involved in this climate justice work.
Yeah.
So the nouns that I mentioned, uh, Father, Father, Master, King, Lord.
Mm,
That has been the predominant understanding of who God is in the last 2,000 years. So our hymns, we include
yes.
those in our
Hmm.
hymns, our
Hmm.
prayers, our liturgies,
Hmm.
and our sermons. So it's just like the cycle, it just reinforces
So,
itself. And when feminist theologians came in the 1960s and till now, we said, well, the Bible is also full of these other nouns like mother, mother
hmm.
hen, mother eagle, wisdom.
Hmm.
Um, so these are all feminine. So let's use that. And so feminist theologians have been kind of introducing them, reintroducing them. But, we haven't got much motion in the church. So our prayers are still patriarchal
Hmm.
and still male centered. So this book, because we are created in the image of God. And
Hmm.
so God, many years ago, I was actually in Sharm for the COP meeting, which is on climate change, the United
Hmm.
Nations meeting on climate change, and I went there with the World Council of Churches. During that time in Charm, I traveled on a bus to St. Catherine's Monastery.
Hmm.
And in St. Catherine's Monastery, which is still part of Egypt,
Hmm.
is where the Mount Sinai, Mount Sinai, we think it's one mountain, but it's kind of a
Hmm.
range of mountains.
Hmm.
And they have the burning bush.
Hmm.
So I went into the monastery and I saw the burning bush, and it didn't quite look like the burning bush I had imagined, because what's there is more of a tree that looks fossilized.
Hmm.
Anyway, they
Yeah.
built a whole monastery around it, and
Okay.
Christians and Jews and
Yeah.
Muslims, they all think it's,
Yeah.
well, we claim it, but none of these places, none of these holy places, like the Church of Nativity where
Yeah.
Jesus is supposedly born, we
Hmm.
don't know. So
Good luck.
anyway, people built churches and monasteries around it. But it was, in the biblical story, God calls Moses to set his people free, and then he encounters God at the burning bush, and he asks God, "Who do I say is sending me?" And God says, Yahweh, which is translated as "I am I am who I am." And so that's a fascinating statement in the biblical passage. And, when I was at Glencairn Public School, the school that you took me to, I
Yeah.
went to like 4 years of ESL because I couldn't speak English. So
Mm.
all these verbs were ingrained and embedded in me. And, I hated doing the verb conjugations.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
now, 50 years later, I'm like, wow, it all makes sense to me. Because when God is saying, I am Yahweh, it is the verb to be.
Yeah.
So I am, you are, they are. So God is actually using a verb to describe God's self, I
Yeah.
am. And in the Hebrew, that Yahweh, the I am, is um, imperfect verb tense. So if you go back to grammar school, the imperfect means it's present and future. It's not a finalized
Mhm.
verb tense. So that's why we sometimes translate it as I will be who I will be.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
that's, we translate that in two different ways. But
Mhm.
it is a fascinating way to speak about God because that is how God describes God's self. It's not a
Mhm.
noun, it
The
is
verb.
a verb. And in the New Testament, Jesus uses the I am passages many times
Absolutely.
alone. Yeah.
Hmm.
And together with, I am the way, or I am the light, I am the wisdom. So
Hmm.
we see it both in the Old Testament and in the New Testament. So that should really kind of question or force us to rethink our ways of speaking about who God is.
Hmm.
Because as I said, in When God Became White, how how we imagine who God is impacts our thinking, our ways of being, and our actions. So
Hmm.
once we recognize that God is described or identified as a verb, it really makes us think, okay, then we are also verbs. We can't just sit around. We need to
Hmm.
be active.
Hmm.
And my call in the book is, yes, we need to be really active in this climate justice work. We can't just say, oh, let the scientists do their work or,
Hmm.
the politicians. No, each of us,
Hmm.
we are created in the image of God. And
Yeah.
so we also should be, looking at ourselves as verb, as action. We are called to not, the love, but loving or creating or helping or praising. It should be this action that we also understand ourselves to be. And then I hope then that as we tie it back to your first question about spirituality,
Hmm.
then that we as spiritual beings will be active beings who will really be change makers in this world. And yeah.
Thank you for reconnecting those things because I think that that's at the heart of all this really is
Mhm.
we I think in our paralysis around all of this stuff, we
Yeah.
tend to point our fingers to people we expect to fix it, but we need to be participants in that. Anyway, let's talk about water because you write a
Okay.
lot about water in here too. You argue that the commodification of water is more than an environmental or economic issue, which of course it is, but it's a theological one. Water, which Scripture so often presents as the gift from God for the flourishing of all creation, has become something that is bought, is sold, and is profited from. And here in Canada, conversations about clean water inevitably bring us to Indigenous communities that have lived under long-term boil water advisories and ongoing questions about stewardship and justice. And it's often our Indigenous communities that are speaking the loudest about protecting our waterways. How did we get from seeing water as a gift to seeing it as a commodity? And your theology of creation challenges the church to respond to that in profound ways. So if you can say more about that.
Yeah, so I do have a chapter on water justice. I think, what you just described with the Native Canadians, the Aboriginals that are living there, that have lived there for thousands of years, and how we have kind of destroyed it. I, I believe that Canada has the most lakes in all of the world.
Hmm.
So we have, well, I should say we, because I'm still
You
Canadian.
still have that passport,
Yeah,
Grace.
I do. And
Don't
I
let it
just
go.
was,
It's
that was
big.
just to Montreal.
It's
Yeah, I
it's
always
getting
use the
it's
Canadian.
Grace. It's getting more valuable every day. So hold on
Yes,
to
it
it.
is. Yes. I have to always make sure I renew it on time because, they're all staggered, my US and then my American
I know.
passport.
I know.
I use my Canadian to go in, and then when I come back to US, I have to use American.
I know.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, but
sorry.
yeah, no, no, it's important. And we have the most wa the lakes and lots of clean water, but we have destroyed it in so many ways.
Hmm.
And so, when I went to Glencairn Public School, we I we just drank water out of the
Out of the
fountain in the
fountain. That's right.
hallways.
Yeah,
That's
we all
the
did. Yeah.
kids did.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in the 70s and 80s, if anyone said that someone's going to start putting this in a plastic bottle and sell it at a profit,
I
we would
know.
have all laughed. I would have,
Absolutely.
yeah. Like, what do you mean you're just gonna, bottle
Here,
this?
Here's the
Yeah.
one that kills me. I'll interrupt you for
Uh-huh.
1 second. I was at the gas station a couple of years ago.
Uh-huh.
At that time, gas was like $1.10 or 20 a liter or whatever it was.
Uh-huh.
And I walked into the store, and the guy in front of me put two 500 ml bottles of water on the thing. Okay. And he paid $2 a bottle
Oh my.
for half a liter, right? So he paid $4 for a liter. And while he was paying for that, he was complaining about the price of gasoline. And I thought, this is outrageous. This is the world that we've landed in. We're
Yeah.
willing to pay for something that costs fractions of a cent
Yeah.
for a liter out of our
Uh-huh.
taps. You
Yeah.
bottle it up and sell it at the gas station, and the guy is not outraged at all, but he's
Yeah.
outraged about this non-renewable resource. Any-
Yeah.
I
Well,
digress. I give up my
yeah,
rant.
no, but
Go on.
Kevin, I love the way you digress because that fits perfectly into this whole water discussion. So the World Lutheran Federation they have a model. I guess churches have models. I don't know what the Presbyterian Church does, but the Anglican Church may. But the Lutheran Federation had a model for a long time, and their motto was creation not for sale.
Mm,
So I really appreciated it because they would go to the COP meetings and other meetings to protest because we have commodified so much
mm,
of creation. So, you pack the water and you sell it in these water bottles at a huge margin, and these water companies are making so much money.
yeah.
They're profiting off creation. And
Hmm.
so it really questions us, why are we buying into this consumerism? Because scientists have been saying some of these bottled water isn't any cleaner, and
No.
now they're full of microplastics because the plastics go into the water.
Right.
And on top of it, there's so much damage into the earth because, making the plastics and then the waste of plastics, you know, shipping them around all
Yeah.
around the world and taking them in truckloads. So the damage of it is enormous
Hmm.
versus just having the tap water. Much of the tap water in North America and other places, they are drinkable. You're supposed to drink the tap water. And if you don't feel safe, you can just boil the water or filter it. But this water bottle business, we really have to let the world know that this is unacceptable. And,
Hmm.
people profiting. So creation not for sale is a great kind of model for
Hmm.
many of our churches to follow, that we have to stop this
Hmm.
and really question why we are doing this, because it's not much safer water, and the damage that it's doing to the earth is awful. So people just using, you can carry your water bottle around everywhere.
Yes, that's right.
It's not that heavy, and you can get the water at the airport or at work. You can just drink it. So
Hmm.
I just don't know why we're buying into that. The bottled water is cleaner and safer and more drinkable. It's not. So people really
Well,
have to, yeah.
yeah, and I mean, this is something that I've recently come to as well. I mean,
Uh,
I never bought bottled water; it's never a thing. But since my broken leg, it was like, oh, drink more water, drink more water.
yeah.
So Catherine and my wife came home with a really nice water bottle. So I find myself toting this thing around because I hate. I mean, we have cases. We had a half a skid of it donated here the other day for our food programs, right? Bottled
Okay.
water, and
Uh-huh.
I have these mixed feelings about it, right? I'm
Yeah.
like, okay, well, this is helpful because I can give it to someone who's coming in the door, but it's more bottled water, right?
Yeah.
It's
Uh-huh.
anyway. You listen. One of the things that, and because the section on water is amazing, and I got like 8 questions I won't ask about that, but the one that I thought was interesting, one of the ones is when you challenge communities to
Mhm.
think about how they interact with water. Two things, I guess. One of them is the connection to our baptism, which I think is obvious and should call people to some account. And in our context, in the Anglican Church, in the baptismal promises, we promise, one of the promises we make is that we will strive to safeguard the integrity of God's creation and respect, renew, and sustain the face of the earth. So, what are we doing? Right. So that there's that. But on a practical level, you encourage communities to follow the waterways in their communities. And I wonder if you can say something about that. I mean, here in London, the Thames River, the Antler River, as our indigenous communities call it, like what does that mean for a local community to follow follow the watershed. You'll know what's going on.
Mhm. Yeah, so the importance of water, which is, right from the beginning with the creation story and all throughout, the stories around the well, Jacob's well, and then
Mm.
into New Testament the Samaritan woman at the well.
Hmm.
There's so many stories around water, and we Christians have, depending on the denomination, have sacraments and the baptism water. So the water itself is important. We're filled with water as human beings. So water justice is crucial. In the book, I'm talking about the baptismal water and then water justice and then also virtual water.
Hmm.
And how much water goes into when we're talking about saving water, yes, turning off the tap when you're not using it is
Hmm.
crucial. Using less for showering and less for washing is crucial. But the other aspect of water is the virtual water. How much water goes into the foods that is needed to nourish us. And I
Hmm.
think as North Americans and other people around the world, we consume too much anyway. So we have to try to reduce our consumption in many ways, energy, water, food, etc., because we are overconsumers. Society wants us to consume more than we actually need. But meat versus vegetarian meal or a vegan meal or a pescatarian meal, the
Hmm.
meat to produce the hamburger is way more virtual water than the salad that you may eat at lunch or dinner. So those are questions. And also the indigenous waterways, it's important. Here in the US, we had a lot of protests with water because they wanted to drill for the oil and etc. So many indigenous people have been very vocal about this is our sacred land. You cannot
Hmm.
drill because once you drill and make the pipeline for the oil, it's going to burst one day and it's going
Hmm.
to damage the waterways. So there have been a lot more protests that I'm aware of here in the US, but I'm sure there have been many
Oh,
in Canada too. And we have to listen to the indigenous voices. It is their land, and we are kind of borrowing their land too. And
hmm.
they have taught us that the land and the water is sacred. During
Hmm.
the COP meetings, many indigenous people come from around the globe to protest because they are saying that we are damaging the sacred land and the
Hmm.
sacred waterways. The waterways we can view as like the blood vessels in our bodies.
Hmm.
They move around carrying the nutrients. It's necessary. You can't block the vessels. You can
Hmm.
have a blood clot and you may die from it. And in the same ways, if we can see how the indigenous people are telling us these waterways are sacred. They water the soil and the
Hmm.
garden and the farmland. They give water, to the animals. I was recently in New Mexico, and they have the Rio Grande
Hmm.
River. We think of Grand River, it's going to be huge, but many parts of it have actually dried up.
Right.
So the part that I visited, there's no water left. It's all dry. So
Wow.
there are parts of that Rio Grande, which is sacred waterways to the Pueblo people that have been there for thousands of years. And, the Spanish took over, and then
Hmm.
now the white settlers have taken over. It brought so much damage that parts of it have actually dried up. It is drier than other parts of the land. And so the question you raise is so important. We forget about the sacredness, but you also see the sacredness in the Bible too. And as Christians, we've lost this understanding of the sacred water. We've damaged it. We've bottled it up and sold it at a profit. So as Christians, we really need to rethink this and understand that this is all spirituality.
Yeah, absolutely. And here in London, we've got, as I say, the Thames.
Yeah.
There's about 60. Because I rode it a lot when I was still riding a bike, where I broke my leg and finished all that off. But um, there's 60 kilometers of trail that follows the Thames here, and if
Wow.
people and most people in the city never see it. But I think if people went out there, they'd see, right in the heart of all this urban development is this beautiful um, piece of creation. And when you go in there, when you spend time on the trail, it is as though you've stepped away from the built environment for a minute,
Yeah.
and you get to experience them, and it does something somatically inside of you, I think. Like
Yeah.
I think so. When I read that, follow the watershed, I'm like, yeah, if our people in our churches went and walked the watersheds in our communities, they'd see a lot. You'd see the things that are desperately wrong, and you
Mhm.
go, because when you see people just polluting willfully, and you
Uh-huh.
go, oh, stop that, right? Like
Yeah.
we
Mhm.
all have to own a piece of that.
Yeah, and I think what people there's so much disconnect as we live today in this consumerized world. So, you can buy the chicken in a grocery store, the apples are like wrapped in
Right.
plastic for some reason. So there's so much disconnect. But once we kind of recognize the organic understanding, so what happens to the waterways will affect the apple that you're going to be eating, which will affect you, and etc. This whole cycle of life that the water, we have to stop polluting the water. And when you get into the Great Lakes, so I also grew up in, and after I left London, moved to Toronto. If you go to lake, is it Lake
Lake
Ontario,
Erie, yeah, yeah.
Lake Erie, or Lake Ontario?
Lake Ontario, yeah,
Yeah, the waste and the garbage, and, like,
yeah,
and you can just see it from Toronto. Like, you just go to the harbor front, it's
yeah,
all there, bottled water and garbage. So we really need to do better,
yeah,
because that's just gonna affect us and everything that we eat and all
yeah.
the vegetation,
Hmm.
the animals and the fish. Yeah.
Yeah. Talk to us about the disproportionate ways this sort of climate injustice and crisis affects women and girls in a more deep and profound way than it does. Again, there's a patriarchy involved even in that, and plus also the sort of environmental racism. Flint. All that sort of stuff. So, but I was taken by your pointing out to the reader the disproportionate cost paid uh, by women and girls.
Yeah, so in the book, I introduce intersectional theology, which
Hmm.
is from a book called Intersectional Theology that I co-wrote with Susan Shaw.
Hmm.
So for those who are interested, read that one, Intersectional
Hmm.
Theology. But in that book, what we're trying to say is these different oppressions intersect with each other to continue to oppress. So the different forms of oppression is like patriarchy, racism,
Hmm.
climate change, economics, gender, sexuality. These are different ways that are used to oppress people.
Hmm.
So when we think about climate change, it's not an isolated issue. It
No.
intersects with gender, economics, with race and ethnicity, and ableism and sexuality. So these are all intersecting.
Hmm.
People think, oh, it's climate justice, or climate change, it's just one issue. No, that's why when you're working on climate justice issue, you're also working on economic justice, racial justice,
Yeah.
gender justice,
Hmm.
everything. Because these are never isolated issues. So when it comes to gender and climate injustice, we already know that women always make less than men as a
Hmm.
whole around the globe. So women tend to be poor. Women tend to be the caretakers of elderly and young children and those who may be disabled. So women, when climate injustice happens, so what scientists are saying is the storms are getting stronger,
Hmm.
and the droughts are getting drier, the heat index is going up. So right now, um, we are having record breaking summer again. Like, we thought last year was record breaking, it's record breaking again, and
Hmm.
thousands of people are dying because of the heat.
Yeah.
And you experience that also in the winter, record breaking storms, and people are freezing to death.
Hmm.
So we have to recognize the intersectionality of these issues. So when the earthquakes are happening or when tsunamis are happening or hurricanes are happening, for one example I'll give, those who live in island countries or live in the coastal areas in the Philippines or in South America and in Africa, many of the coastal regions, people live off that land. So they're either fishers or they have farmland near the ocean or the waters. So when hurricanes come, they destroy everything that these families have built, their livelihood, their homes, etc. So, in many cases, and scientists have written about it, New York Times,
Mhm.
a lot of these, I'm not saying anything new. The men will then go inland and try to find work.
Mhm.
Some of them can, and then they will send money back to their wives.
Mhm.
Many of them cannot find work or don't make enough money to send back to their families. So, the families that are left behind are children, elderly, disabled, and then the mother has to take care of them.
Mhm.
If the husband doesn't send enough money or enough so that she can feed everyone or make some ways of living, she will then start selling off her
Mhm.
children.
Yeah.
This is how human trafficking happens.
Yeah.
And people don't recognize the enormity of human trafficking. It is
Mhm.
enormous around the globe. And then some of these trafficked human beings then are sex trafficked. And
Yeah.
sex trafficking is an enormous problem. And so is human trafficking here in North America.
Absolutely.
So we recognize that there is no separation from this. So when climate injustice is happening, it feeds into this human trafficking. And, a lot of women suffer because a lot of the young girls and young women are then sold into sex trafficking
Mhm.
and without ID or they are trapped and they
Mhm.
cannot get out of this. So little documentaries are coming up with the human trafficking and sex trafficking, but
Mhm.
we have to recognize that this is all intertwined.
Yeah, and I mean that matters, and it matters here. I mean, this corridor to 401,
Yes.
from
Uh-huh.
Windsor up
Yeah.
to sort of Kingston is one of the busiest areas for human trafficking
Yes.
in North America.
Uh-huh.
It's a big problem, and like I just when I was reading that, I was thinking even about like Katrina and New Orleans, right? Like
Yes.
how many of those single mothers in poor
Yeah.
neighborhoods,
Uh-huh.
racialized people, were
Mhm.
unable to get out. They're the last people to be looked after.
Mhm.
It's just incredible.
Yeah,
Um,
and we fail to recognize that the rich have big insurances, while as the poor, they can't afford this insurance. So many of them are left distraught for years and decades. It will impact them greatly, while the rich can rebuild very quickly. Yeah,
that's
so you
right.
already see the
Yeah,
economic injustice there.
yeah,
Yes.
it's wild. And the other thing in this book, readers, if you pick it up, you'll see that like it's just the realization that so much of this is happening so more often and in more severe ways. I mean, I grew up in Newfoundland. We didn't see hurricanes very much. They were petered out by the time they got to Newfoundland. Now
Uh-huh.
we see hurricanes. When they come up the East Coast now, it's not uncommon for a hurricane to come across Newfoundland, and we community with houses washed into the sea. If you told somebody in Newfoundland 25 years ago that the sea could take a house away, you'd say that's crazy. We're
Uh-huh.
built on rock. Didn't the Bible say something about
Yeah.
that? But
Build your house
but
on a rock.
but anyway, look, a couple of more things because there's so much. My gosh, I tell you, I have so many questions. I'm like, when you get here, when I get you here to London, we got to sit and talk about this book. Um, but
I
I
can
was
do a
really,
whole book talk for your church on
you
Earthbound.
could too.
But I
That's
have two,
awesome.
yeah, I have two new books coming out next year, but anyway, they'll
Okay,
come
well,
out later.
all right, we got to talk about that in a bit too. So there's
But
two.
Earthbound is more urgent right now.
It's a big one in a minute. One of the more beautiful parts of this book for me was the you introduce some Korean concepts. One of them being, and I'll say this wrong, but jung.
Hmm.
And
Yeah.
you describe it as sticky love, and a love that binds us together, a love that refuses to let us go, and reminds us that we're not isolated, we're not alone, but deeply interconnected with one another, with creation, with God. Introduce our listeners to this concept of Jiang,
Yeah.
and
So,
fix my pronunciation.
Chong, you were pretty good.
Okay.
So, I was born in Korea and we immigrated to London, 1975. So, as a Korean American, Korean Canadian theologian, I use my own heritage. And that's not new. People have been doing that. German theologians, French,
Hmm.
British, they've been using it, their own context and culture to talk about God and understand God more deeply, because we are these finite creatures. We will never understand the fullness of God.
Hmm.
And different languages, French has
Hmm.
different words,
Hmm.
and the indigenous people have different terms for snow or soil or water, way more terms. So
Hmm.
Korea has this understanding of love, which is a little different from the Western understanding. So I think it's a little helpful way to understand love or connectedness. So, Chong, as you described, this love that is kind of inseparable. And, when I was writing, I feel like it's kind of similar to the biblical understanding. Nothing can separate us from the love of God.
Hmm.
The east or west or north or south, we're going to be still connected to the love of God, because nothing in this world can separate us. It almost is similar to that, in that in Korea, relationships are key, way
Hmm.
more emphasized than in the West. The West,
Hmm.
it's individualism.
Hmm.
Me, I. As long as I succeed, I do well. It doesn't matter about my
Hmm.
family or the
That's right.
community. Yeah. But in the East, the community overrides the individual. You're nobody. It's the
Hmm.
family and the community. So that understanding helps us about the love. It's kind of inseparable. This bond, even though you may have arguments or disagreements, this bond, this chong will still keep you in this relationship. That's why friendships are for your lifetime.
Hmm.
Your public school friends, in Korea, they have reunions like for grade one,
Hmm.
two, three, and
Really?
people get together because
Yeah.
you're friends for life. It's not this thing, oh, you were in class together, so end of class, bye bye.
Yeah.
It is this ongoing thing. A teacher student relationship is ongoing, etc., etc. So, this Chong is a helpful way for us to understand the connectedness and this unbreakable love
Hmm.
that is there between us. And, when I think about even you inviting me back, it's maybe a Chong, because
Hmm.
in many cases, once you're off the podcast, that's it,
Yeah.
next guest, come
Yeah.
on.
Yeah.
But this Chong keeps us together. And
Hmm.
so you have this relationship ongoing. And I think that's helpful for us living in the West. It makes us re-question, our ongoing relationships. Even if you stop working at an office, you can still become this. You can still have this unbreakable bond with your past coworkers, and the relationships are ongoing.
Yeah, and just the nature of that being connected to environment as well, and
Yes.
to
Mhm.
creation,
Yeah.
and that stickiness, that sort of, the other concept that you introduce is Han, and
Mhm.
as a parish priest, I'm often with people who are carrying wounds they didn't choose, right? People who've suffered at somebody else's wrongdoing or sin. Um, Addiction, abuse, racism, poverty, displacement, it's all around us. And it strikes me that they're carrying what you call Han. Um, so if you could say a little bit more about what that is, and how can a church become a community that doesn't simply preach forgiveness, but actually helps bear and heal that harm the way Han talks about it?
Yeah, so, your first question about spirituality, I think people think it's just me and God. So you
Yeah.
pray to God, you sing to God, you listen for God's voice in books or sermons in worship. So it is this individualism. And what liberation theologians have said is, yes, the vertical relationship is important, but so is a horizontal relationship. How
Hmm.
you treat your brothers and sisters, if you're harming them or not. So Han is this unjust suffering. So it refocuses our understanding and our relationship horizontally, rather than the vertical. So if you have wronged someone, like why is someone hungry? That's a question that liberation theologians have
That's right.
asked. So that is the unjust suffering. because the systems are created to cause suffering and pain. So this Korean word Han is making us reshift our attention away from this individual, this vertical and the horizontal. And as an ecofeminist theologian, I'm saying we're not just harming each other, we're harming the
Mm,
earth, the animals, the
right.
fish, the birds, what indigenous people call the four-legged cousins, the
Yep.
animals roaming the earth.
Yep.
So it's telling us to come back and re-examine our actions and prevent the harm against others and against nature and the earth.
I was really, I found myself, I actually went and picked up the Bible and read Matthew 25 again. And because it really draws you into that when Jesus says you do it to the least of these, you're doing it to
Yeah.
me, right?
Yes,
So
exactly.
it's that shared suffering. And I was reminded of Desmond Tutu writing about Ubuntu, right?
Yeah,
And that notion of,
exactly. Yeah.
right, your suffering is wrapped up in my suffering,
Yeah.
right? Like I don't get to be excused from your suffering because it's not mine. It's
Uh-huh.
because collectively it's ours,
Yes.
right?
Uh-huh.
Like especially as it relates to this climate stuff.
Yes.
Um, Grace, one of the things I'll carry away from this conversation is a reminder of just how much theology matters, not simply because it shapes what we believe, but it shapes how we live. And you've articulated that well in this book. The way we imagine God influences the way we treat one another, and the way we treat the beautiful earth, importantly, that we've been given. So thank you for helping us think more
Thank
deeply, love more generously, to recover a vision of Christianity and of Christian faith and practice that's rooted in justice and in hope and in flourishing for all of creation. I think we do a great deal of time talking about what we believe or about orthodoxy, but we don't spend a lot of time talking about orthopraxy. Like, what
you.
does it look like to live right in all of this? And I think this book gives us an incredible encouragement to think about how we do that. So, really, thank you for the book and thank you for joining us here on From the Heart of the City.
Oh, thank you so much, Kevin, for inviting me. And I'll be doing the Earthbound retreat at Crieff Hills, which is close to London and
It
Toronto.
is.
So I
Yep.
hope your listeners will come join me because, we're just touching the surface. We need to go deeper
Yep.
and think about how we can change our ways. So thank you for your ministry with this podcast and everything else you do in your big
Mm.
cathedral church. So thank you so much, Kevin.
We're a big cathedral church, but we're not a big crowd of people. So we're working on that,
We'll work
and
on it together.
we're
Yeah.
working on it.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me as I was thinking about this as well is one of the things that's evolving here is we have it's become a very diverse community. We have a
Oh,
lot of
that's
people
great.
from
Yeah.
Asia and Africa who
Mhm.
are coming in,
Yeah.
and they come with an incredible fervor from their own faith backgrounds, and they're learning East Western culture.
Yeah.
Um, but I couldn't help but think of them when I read this because so many of them have suffered so much because
Yeah.
of
Mhm.
environmental issues as well. So this book matters. Your ministry always matters. And for those of you who are in the London area, watch our webpage at St. Paul's Cathedral because we will be having, I am committed to making sure Grace comes in sometime in the fall for a Sunday morning, and we'll do a Saturday event around some of her writing as well. So thank you, Grace, and thank you for making time for me today. I know you travel all over and you're just getting back from a big trip, so making the time, we appreciate it. Thanks so much.
Oh, thank you so much.
Well, that was a wonderful conversation. And I'll tell you, I've never had one with Grace that hasn't been wonderful. And I'd encourage you to think about um, picking up the book, planning to come when she's here in the fall. Look for the Craft Hills event because, as she says, that is very close by. I hope you, like me, are leaving this episode with a deeper appreciation for the fact that theology matters in all things, and it certainly matters when we talk about the climate. And I hope you'll think about what she says about how we think about God or how we perceive God shapes so much of what we do and how we live in the world. So Grace has reminded us that caring for creation isn't a political add-on to the Christian faith, something that we do because, oh, it's uh, in vogue or whatever. It's a part of what it means to love God. It's a part of what it means to love our neighbor. It's a part of what it means to live out our baptismal covenant. So If today's conversation resonated with you, I'd encourage you, as I said, to pick up her book. It's called Earthbound: God at the Intersection of Climate and Justice. Whether you agree with every argument or not is really irrelevant. You'll find yourself wrestling with some of her conclusions in a good way, in the way that God has encouraged us to wrestle with things. And I think you'll find it thoughtful and provocative, and a really important contribution to the conversation the church needs to be living today and into the future. As always, thank you for joining me here on From the Heart of the City. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share with a friend. It really does help others discover the conversation and for us to get this out. Next week, I look forward to welcoming our friend Kevin Nye. Kevin was also a previous guest on the Vickers Crossing. And Kevin works in the field of food insecurity, homelessness, and he's no stranger to many of you who work on homelessness in the church here in Canada. And we'll be talking about his compelling new book, Hope for the Mission, in a time when many churches are asking faithful questions, and certainly this church here at St. Paul's is faithful questions about what does it look like to witness in a world which is changing rapidly and where so many are struggling even just to find a home. In the meantime, I'm Kevin George. Thank you for listening and for being a part of this today. I'll see you next time right here from the heart of the city.
The hearth is warm, the ale is poured. The whispers of ancient tales are roared. Feet are tapping on the floor as the music calls us to the door.